To get into the situation in Iran, and online with us is Jamal Abdi. He's the president of the National Iranian American Council. N.I.A.C, N-I-A-C.org is their website. You can tweet him at @jabdi or at N.I.A. Council. And Jamal, welcome back to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And by the way, I'm remote. We're doing our show today from the Bellevue College campus at KBCS in Bellevue, Washington. And so there's as a result of that, there's about a second delay in our telephone. So if we step on each other or whatever, it's all good. These major new sanctions that Donald Trump says he has imposed or is in the process of imposing on Iran to ramp up the pressure. According to a number of economists, excuse me, well, one specifically, Caitlin Birch, a global economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit, that's The Economist magazine, told CNBC's Squawk Box Europe on Monday, quote, "We can safely say that Iran's revenue from oil has been cut by at least 2/3, so they are in a very dangerous economic position." If Trump's sanctions are actually effective at knocking out not just the surface, parts of the Iranian economy, but really kick out the underpinnings of the Iranian economy and throw it into the equivalent of a 1930s-style economic depression, what will the consequences of that be? And do you think that that's actually what Trump is trying to do, and is that a very real possibility?
I do think that that is the strategy, if we can even call it that. So if the sanctions actually succeed in what their intended goal is, well, success supposedly is Iran capitulates and accepts these 12 demands that Pompeo has issued, which essentially equate to Iran completely changing its security posture and letting its guard down when it comes to its regional challengers and foes. Doing a 180 on the entire Islamic Republic as it's known. And while I'm sure that we would love to see some of those things happen, or at least some accommodation being reached, it's not going to come through these sanctions. So if the sanctions succeed, which they are, these are very successful sanctions, if the goal is to make lives of ordinary Iranians miserable, but if the idea is, which I think it is to galvanize Iranians to come out into the streets and put pressure on the government and the regime, and that pressure will then be translated into some behavior change or some desire to capitulate on the Iranian government's part. What's really happening is the opposite, though, because there is not a organized political movement behind this, and really a lot of the organized, civil society inside of Iran has really been crippled by this. They are among the, they're the canaries in the coal mine of this maximum pressure policy, and so. Really what we're seeing is Iranian civil society being devastated, the middle class being devastated, all of the levers that could actually put upward pressure on a government or on a regime have all been dismantled by the United States sanctions. And so what you have instead is a government that is becoming or will become increasingly radicalized, and where the most hardline forces and the forces that benefit from a securitized environment and benefit from, there's a threat of war, there needs to be a state of emergency, they're the ones that end up accumulating the power, and it's at the expense of more moderate voices and civil society voices. So one of the architects of these sanctions once asked me, or it was at a panel, said, well, would you support sanctions on Nazi Germany? And the response is, well, we did put sanctions on Germany. That's part of the way that we got to the radical state that Adolf Hitler presided over. And there's no history of this approach actually working, and yet the wake-up call that should have been last week of the United States being 10 minutes away from launching military strikes that could have started World War III apparently fell on deaf ears in the Trump administration, and they're going to stay the course and just continue with these sanctions. Consequences be damned.
Well, I think you might have already answered my second question, but let me run through it anyway. You would think that Americans would have enough common sense and memory to even recent memory. Our sanctions against Cuba just caused people to become more loyal to Fidel. Our sanctions against Venezuela caused people to become more loyal to Hugo Chavez. The Great Depression here in the United States, which you could argue was not exogenous, it wasn't caused by some external force that we could point to, but there were forces that were blamed for the Great Depression, and probably rightly so, the big banks and Wall Street. It didn't cause Americans to say, oh, I guess we just need to capitulate to the big banks and Wall Street. It pulled Americans together. Tough times, people tend to pull together during tough times. And during World War II, we had, you couldn't buy butter, you couldn't buy milk, you couldn't buy meat without coupons, without rationing coupons. There were all kinds of limits. It was functionally sanctions. And did that cause people to say, screw Roosevelt? No, they gave him 4 terms. When in the history of the world have sanctions ever been successful at doing anything other than strengthening your opponents? And when, Jamal, are these idiots who are running American foreign policy going to figure this out? Even Kennedy made this mistake with Cuba.
Well, and look at Saddam and Iraq. We had sanctions, crippling sanctions there, and that didn't work in in changing Saddam's behavior or in preventing the United States from getting into the most devastating war of at least the last generation. So we've seen this playbook before, and I think that the answer to your question is, yeah, they know this. They know this isn't going to work. That's exactly the point. These are people in John Bolton and Mike Pompeo who are apparently running the show. Trump, I guess, parachutes in and stops the military strikes last minute. But by and large, it seems like it's John Bolton and Mike Pompeo's world, and we're just living in it. And they believe that military action is necessary. They think that, we need to get there. And what I view is how they see this is that they see political obstacles to military action more than they see obstacles coming from Iran.
I agree. So, Jamal, forgive my interruption, but we just have about a minute and a half, and it just occurred to me, the one area where sanctions actually are effective, and you're mentioning Iraq is a great example, is if you actually intend, if your goal is to invade a country, destroy a country, bomb a country, ruin a country, then sanctions actually do work. They weaken a country to the point where you might be able to then attack them. Do you think I think these guys are thinking that way, that the goal of these sanctions in Iran is to weaken it enough that they won't have enough, money and resources to run their military?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think that even some of the folks who are coming at this from the lens of we need regime change so that we can have a democracy in Iran, which, great, I would love to have a democracy in Iran, but you can't install a democracy. You have to grow a democracy. But I think even they, in reality, people like Mark Dubowitz from Foundation for Defense of Democracies and these, Washington think tanks and lobbies that are essentially the de facto lobbies of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel, they don't want Iran to actually be a country that is ruled by its people and that actually has a say and agency in what's happening in the region. They don't want that. And so the best way to do that is to weaken the country and then destroy it with a war. Iran is already in the midst of an economic war imposed by the United States, and it's just a matter of time until we get into the military course if something doesn't change.